Hello. Oh, good. Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us here today. Talk about an incredibly important subject, ocean and marine and coastal-based tourism, and something that is on front of mind, really, as we're coming out of a very incredibly difficult time for the tourism sector. My name is Christian Telegi. I am the Global Director of the Ocean Program at the World Resource Institute, but also have the great pleasure of leading the Secretariat for the Ocean Panel as well. Today we are going to be exploring a little bit more about ocean and coastal-based tourism, particularly in the context of the high-level panel for sustainable ocean economy, and I'm delighted to have one of the co-chairs of the Ocean Panel, President Whips, sitting next to me, and we'll hear from him shortly. We've done this session very much in collaboration. We heard a lot about partnerships here in Panama with the Ocean Foundation and Iberostar, and so we're delighted to have them be part of this. We're going to really sort of focus on these really critically important connections between topics between tourism and the role that tourism can play in the marine and coastal spaces. Some of you may have seen a piece of research that the Ocean Panel members commissioned that was launched in June 2022, last year at the UN Ocean Conference, where the headline that came out of that was that 50%, so 50% of all tourism is ocean and coastal based. That is a huge number, and I think we knew it was a lot, but we didn't know it was that much, and so, the tourism industry, I think, is excited about the opportunity to play a role that cuts across a whole dimensions of the ocean issues, whether it's food, climate, biodiversity, et cetera. So it's incredibly important. However, we've seen an unprecedented disruption of the tourism sector and the income that was brought to countries from the pandemic. And that really exposed some vulnerabilities. Probably some vulnerabilities that people knew were maybe there, but didn't necessarily, knew how vulnerable, they were, and particularly when it comes to, the juncture of sort of these destination operators, the contribution to economies, jobs, et cetera. So quite an important dimension there. But the good news is that done right, tourism has the opportunity to really stimulate high-quality economic opportunities for local communities, making sure that you're investing in local communities, to restore the natural environment to one that is of past days and years, one that we see as more biodiversity rich and protected, and of course, protect and revitalize, culture and heritage as well. And so a key to that, and I said this has been a priority of the high-level panel itself. Today, they've launched a joint statement that talks about the opportunities for action and urges transition towards sustainable, resilient, and regenerative tourism that will benefit the ocean, people, and planet. So looking at the multiple benefits that are there. And I urge you to look at that statement. And I hope, when you have, all of the members of the Ocean Panel, from across different geographies saying that this is important, please, let's use that as a tool to say, no, this is not just me, if I was a local NGO or a local tourism business saying this, that's as important and why we're doing this. You have 17 leaders that represent nearly 50% of the world's exclusive economic zones that are saying this, so incredibly important. And there's some, hopefully you got there's some of these copies on your seats or at the back of the room, that it's a booklet that gives you great examples and hopefully inspiration of tourism that's going on in each of the high-level panel countries. And I think when I look through this, there's some wonderful examples from Palau, Kenya, Jamaica, Ghana, Canada, Norway, and it's just sort of sort of smattering of, if you were to take action, here are some examples of what action might look like, and so I think. Please do take a copy of this, or take a copy, multiple copies if you should wish to do that. And hopefully, I would like to see is that tourism and the tourism sector are being invited to the table. I think they would say maybe that they haven't been part of the biodiversity discussions or the climate discussions or issues around food, SDGs, et cetera. And I think it's ripe for opportunity for them to be part of that. So, encourage you to think about those partnerships. So we've got a terrific panel here, and what I propose to do is have a brief discussion with each of the, each of our, panelists here, and hopefully start to tease out a little bit more and add a little bit more texture to, what we're talking about here as far as tourism is concerned. So I'm almost embarrassed. The gentleman sitting next to me to my left requires little introduction, but President Whips, we're delighted that you're able to, to join us here. You and I briefly discussed this earlier, and extraordinary times, that Palau experienced is, one of the countries that was probably, hardest hit globally in terms of COVID. But what is tremendous and exciting is your perspectives and views on, well, okay, this is what's happened. Let's draw a line underneath this and think about how do we move forward where, we can protect, we can produce and prosper from the ocean, and revitalize the tourism industry that can restore and regenerate. And so I'm very keen, and I know everyone here in the audience would be very keen to hear some of your thoughts on, what are you thinking? What does it look like in the coming days and months for tourism, Palau, and what does it mean for the health of the ocean? So, President Whips, please.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
well, good afternoon. It is, first of all, great to be here in Panama and to share a little bit about Palau. Palau, we're only 20,000 people. And one of the things that we soon realized, because in 2015, we had a lot of tourists come to Palau. In fact, there was almost 160,000 visitors. So with 20,000 people, 160,000 visitors, you can imagine the impacts. But I think some of the things that we've done over the years in Palau, and I had the opportunity to drive my dad's boat when I was 10 years old, taking divers out to the Rock Islands. Yeah. And back then there was 3,000 tourists. And to go from 3,000 to 150,000, I'm not going to say how old I am, but I'm old enough. It's a few years ago. But you can see that a lot of tourism, if it's not managed properly, can have impacts. And one of the things Palau has always tried to do is really step up its efforts in conservation. We have the Protected Areas Network legislation that was passed and set up marine protected areas around Palau. But an important element of that, I think, that was getting the financing to sustain those marine protected areas. And I think what's always difficult is the financing part. And so, and I happened to be in Congress when we came back to raise that amount twice, actually. And it went from $15 to $30. And when it went from 15 to 30, there's a lot of protests. This is going to scare tourists away. But our thought was always, you need money to protect these areas, and that's the value you're creating for people that come. And then in 2015, we actually passed a law to raise it to $100. At that time, because of all that mass tourism that was coming to Palau, they had so much influence on the politics, they actually took that law and reversed it and took it out. And I didn't run for Senate, I ran for president, didn't make it, but 2 years later, that law came back and they put in the $100 fee. But I think what's most important is we need to understand the value of our resources. And as stewards, well, we need to take care of them. And so when that, in 2015, we actually passed what we call the Marine Palau National Marine Sanctuary Act, and that's where we put in this $100 fee, which they then reduced back down, but and then later brought back. We also said, it's important to understand that if we were going to promote high-value tourism, we also need responsible tourists that come. So there were several other initiatives that were started. One was called the Palau Pledge, which I see Dr. Whitehouse here, and she knows that when you go, your passport gets stamped, and it reminds you that you better tread softly and only leave footprints when you leave. And it, you know, those types of programs that really instill that responsibility in the tourism. So there's a video that was made. Unfortunately, it's not played on United. It's played on China Airlines, which comes from Taiwan, which is great. But it's played when you're in the immigration lounge to remind you that you come, you tread lightly, you protect what you're here to see. And from that, there's been other initiatives from the Bureau of Tourism. And we have the Minister of Tourism that was at that time here with us, Senator Sangabao. But they launched several programs. One is the Green Boots, Green Fins program. And really, Green Fins is, if you're going to go enjoy the ocean, don't step on the coral, don't touch the turtles, you know, be responsible. If you go, don't use plastic bottles, but use water bottles, cups, and it's things that are not contributing to marine pollution, right? Be responsible. Same thing with Green Boots. So that's for land. And then the Olao project is part of that pledge to continue to instill that concept of being caring and respecting of what we have. And we have all these great programs, but right now we don't have any tourists. You know, and it's interesting because we, back in 2018, started construction on a new terminal building to expand our airport. And that was built basically to accommodate 500,000 tourists. But if you don't have good programs and policies in place, those tourists can soon overrun the place. And so really what the challenge is managing those resources. So working in Palau, we have 16 states. I don't think we want to have 1 million tourists. What we want is we want the right amount of tourists that are providing income, and then being able to spread those tourists around Palau. That means not only in the sea, but on the land to enjoy our culture. And at the same time, not only in the southern lagoon, but we have the northern islands, and we have the southern islands, which are, you know, well known for World War II, Peleliu and Angaur. And so managing that market and making sure that they don't overrun the place. You know, I always use this example when I'm talking to some of these states' governors I went to the Sagrada, the church in Barcelona. Yeah, Familia Sagrada in 99, and I went back again in 2015 with my kids. But one thing that I learned is when in 99 when I went, there was lines and it was a mess. And now, you know, they have an online program and you have to register, and now when you go in, the experience is so much better because it's controlled. And I was sharing this with the governor of Koror State, saying we need to have similar types of management for Jellyfish Lake, because if we have 500 people go in at one time, the experience is gone. So how to manage that, how to control it so that the experience is there, but at the same time, you're protecting and not destroying what's there. So it's really about managing and diversifying. And because we haven't had any tourists, it's really allowed the environment to kind of revive. But one of the things that we're doing going forward in developing the tourism market is trying to diversify it. And in diversifying it is getting people from not just one market. In building back better, we want to build back better, so we're exploring new markets. We've convinced our friends from Australia to sponsor or really underwrite a flight. So they have what they call a flights program. So this last week we have the first flight from Brisbane stopping over in Papua New Guinea on to Palau. And that's a weekly service now. It's going to be to bring Australian tourists. We were in Singapore trying to sign up Singapore Airlines to get flights from Singapore. And I was talking yesterday to the Korean delegation, reminding them where's my direct flights from Seoul and where's my direct flights from Tokyo. I was talking to the Japanese minister, because we don't want charter flights, mass tourism. We want regular flights from destinations that can bring people that really care about nature and the environment and want to contribute. And I think being accessible to those markets, being accessible to responsible visitors is so important. So, so that we're not dragged back down the bad path, which is we need tourists. Let's just open the floodgates and let them in. Yeah. Which is so easy for us. So easy to happen. So, thank you.
And really exciting, President Whips, to hear your reflections. And this is coming from a place where you were in the tourism industry effectively as a child and the work there. I mean, even I think the Palau pledge is really interesting to have that stamp in your passport. And even when I flip through my passport and I see it, there's a reminder there. So it goes beyond Palau's borders. Maybe just a quick follow-up question, if I may, and before moving to the panelists. Do you think you're on the cusp of a much greater return of tourists to Palau? I mean, it feels like once word starts to spread around and and people looking for those rather unique experiences and do you think you're right on the edge of more tourists coming to Palau?
I think so. I believe so. Some good news is that we have 2 hotels that are coming up, and they're more of what we call higher value resorts that hopefully accommodations to accommodate people that want to come, enjoy, but not just any tourist that, and I'll just give the example. When we had, we could say, the Chinese invasion, they were not only, there was a lot of them, they wanted to eat everything. And I'll just give you an example, and I guess it doesn't matter what the cost is, right? So it's illegal you shouldn't be harvesting clams in the wild. You shouldn't be taking the bumphead parrotfish, which are treasured, and we banned the taking of them, and the Napoleon wrasse. During that time when there was a boom, guess what? They busted hotels that had bumphead parrotfish in them, had Napoleon wrasse, and almost 100 giant clams were at one of this giant clam reserve were harvested because of that. So that's what we want. We want the right kind of visitor to come back. So building the right accommodations that they're not just there to eat everything that's alive and whatever cost, and just low-end tourism. We want high-value tourism. And so it's Indigo is building a hotel, and also Four Seasons.
Yeah, wow.
So those are exciting. And so we're hoping, and even, when I was talking to the owner of Four Seasons, he said, some of those hotels that you have now, we need to turn into staff accommodations. And we need to stop to keep some of those unwanted visitors out. I thought that was an interesting take on things, but that's part of building back better. We need to change our focus and
really make nature at the center of it.
The nature of the center.
No, that's and obviously the good news of that story is that those tourist organizations were caught, and it's not okay to do that. And I think that's
But let me add one more thing. I think so one of the things that we're trying to do is raise wages in Palau.
Yeah.
And you wonder, well, why did the fisherman go out and get the parrotfish?
Yeah.
Why did he go out and get the clam? Well, it's survival, right?
Yeah.
And so we've got to, and a lot of times what we do is when we have this mass tourism, it's not necessarily helping the livelihood of the people. They keep wages depressed, and so you've got to raise the people's wages so they're participating, so they're not going out there to hunt for these things. And growing up, my dad had quit his job. He was managing a copra plant, and he told my mother, I'm just going to be a fisherman and take tourists out. And so we used to hunt the bumphead parrotfish, and it was unsustainable practices because it was using scuba tanks and mass and exporting it to Guam. Interestingly, I think 27 years later, he's the one that introduced the law to ban the taking of them because he was in the Congress at that time. So, but helping people understand, realizing that there's value to that fish if it's there, and taking people back to seeing it. So it's a process that you have to go through and keep on helping people understand. And
I think what you said there, President Whips, is really interesting, and hopefully it gives our audience and those watching online a real sort of sense of the diversity of issues that are involved when we talk about marine and coastal tourism, and that involves communities, people, nature, and they're all intertwined, and they're great examples if we can get it, if we get it right, and it's very powerful, and I'm very excited and hopeful for Palau, certainly going forward. I'd like to turn to Indonesia now. Ibu Nani Hendrati, Deputy Coordinating Minister for Environment and Forest Management. Thank you so much for being here, Ibu Nani. Indonesia has certainly experienced a similar sort of experience and sort of impacts from COVID, and thinking about the impact that's had on your sort of tourism industry writ large. But I think it's interesting when you start exploring a little bit of what Indonesia has undertaken. It's perhaps reimagining it as well, similar to what Palau has done, along the lines of smaller, more tailored, personalized, localized experiences, making sure that money is going back into communities. And I think in 2020, Indonesia was named World's Best Creative Destination, which I think is really interesting. Creative destination, an award that focuses on sustainability, but that has active, authentic involvement with tourists and local culture. I mean, that's wonderful. It really brings, again, the dimensions of people and nature and bringing that together. And I guess what I would really love, and I'm sure other ones would like to hear, is perhaps you could say just a few words about perhaps the approach of engaging local communities in tourism in Indonesia and some of the experiences there.
Sorry. So thank you, Christians, for the invitations. So Excellency, Mr. President, and the Minister. I would like to highlight here what we have done in the last maybe 8 years about. So the first, I think specifically we say that in the first 5 years of our President Joko Widodo, we have the Minister of Tourism. But then the second period we change. So we add creative economic, so in pledge with the tourism in one ministry. So then we see after the COVID, I think we after the pandemic period, we can see we can recovery of our tourism activities is not far or is not long after this pandemic, because during the pandemic we have a good program in the context of how to bring the local culture as part of the economic creative under the tourism. So we have also program, we call it priority, because Indonesia is too large and archipelagic, so too many islands, more than 17,000, I think 504 islands we have. So then the governments have put it the 10 priority destination tourism at the first. But then we learn from 10, there are 7 destination are the marine tourism. So therefore it's also important for us to bring here the marine tourism. We select 70% as a priority. But then it's not easy to put as a priority, so we then come up with we call super priority. So we select 5, Mr. President. So 5, this is we call it super priority of tourism destination, and we call the nickname is New Bali, because we hope this will be like Bali. It's very attractive place to yes to invite the tourism activity and then the attraction as well. So in this context, we would like also to say that after the pandemic, we have more local community under the local culture activities, but also ecotourism. I think the ecotourism is more like favorite now, places to come for the people. It's not only the local people, but also abroad from the other countries. So this is the first, and also I think in the tourism destination, as I mentioned, priority or super priority. So we also have like the program called the awareness for how to manage the waste, especially for the plastic waste. So we say that circular economy, we start from the tourism destination. So we have a special regulation for this. And also under the ecotourism, because we have also mangrove program, so we use this program also to be part of how to bring up the ecotourism with the community involvement and specifically also women empowerment. So I think this is quite interesting because there's more women now involving in the program in circular economy as well as the ecotourism in some activities. And I think the last part I would like also to mention here, then we, because we care with the climate also, then in the tourism destination we try to make it like motivation to be like green and blue. So then attraction. So I mean attraction here. So it's like a coral reef. We make a restoration program in near the tourism destination such as in Bali. And also we started to have we call it payment ecosystem services, trying to now to design and hopefully to can be implemented not long from now. I think this is what we would like to share to all of you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Nani. And you raised some additional points in there as well about the co-benefits associated with marine and coastal tourism. You know, issues around gender, incredibly important dimensions there, local communities. And I think it feels like, listening to President Whips and Ibu Nani from Indonesia, different geographies, different scales of geographies. I mean, 17,504 islands, archipelagic state, another important island state in the Pacific, but there are lots of linkages that I'm hearing there as well, which I think is incredibly important in that respect. If I could turn to you, Stephanie. Stephanie Westhill is the head of the Tourism Action Coalition for a Sustainable Ocean, otherwise known as TASCO. For those of you not familiar with TASCO, the Ocean Panel itself had a number of action coalitions, and President Whips and Prime Minister Story were very clear on the direction that this shouldn't be just a panel about talking. It needs to be a panel about action and implementation. And one of those mechanisms, and we have some of our partners here in the room, is to develop these coalitions that brings to people around the Ocean Panel's agenda, delivers on the commitments, and helps support countries in the Ocean Panel to deliver on these commitments. And so Stephanie is leading up this coalition and working towards a shared vision of collaboration, regenerative tourism, all the things that you've just heard President Whips and Ibu Nani talking about, but helping to popularize that, being the interface between government and industry, and really trying to accelerate that transition to that sort of that marine coastal tourism sector that we want to see going forward. So having said all that preamble, Stephanie, are there some major opportunities for governments that you see to participate in sort of additional sort of tourism-based activities that you think are really exciting, that you think, you've obviously heard some great examples here, but maybe offer just a few more thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I thank you so much for having me on this very distinguished panel. I think that both of my panelists have shown that product development in terms of fostering products that are and experiences that are sustainable, regenerative, and resilient that is the biggest opportunity if you think about that as a pillar. And there's 4 ingredients in my last couple of years after post-COVID that I really see that could be easy changes for government entities. And that first one is the commitments piece. We've heard so many different commitments the past couple of days, which are amazing. And let's utilize those commitments for changes in tourism behavior. Let's use that as a marketing tool. We heard 50% of Panama's oceans are going to now be protected areas. That is a huge opportunity to work with scuba diving in this area to bring in those more destination steward type of tourists. That's a new market, and I think that there's a great organization called GlobeScan. If anyone is interested, they do incredible market analysis for all different industries. And then on that commitment piece, I really would say government entities, if you have any champions within your organizations, get them involved in the global tourism plastic initiative. Get signatures for the Glasgow Declaration in that ingredient piece there. And then let's layer it with the second ingredient, which I do believe is missing in some destinations, and that is in the policy and planning piece. Food and beverage really needs to be brought to the table more often and sooner rather than later. So I've been part of planning processes where food and beverage stakeholders are kind of brought in too late. And they're actually, they know about the communities that they're in more so than sometimes many other organizations, including NGOs. They might know your community sentiment, and you can have access to that, including them in your planning processes. And then the elephant in the room sometimes is with the plastic-free policies that are going through. We need to be including soda companies in this. It is not just water bottles that are going into our oceans. We really do need them at the table. They need to be part of policy, and there needs to be structure to that. And then the third piece that I see is social impact. So when I read RFPs or partnership collaborations, I don't think we're at a point in time where it is optional to have social impact metrics. It needs to be embedded into those RFPs. It needs to be embedded into the partnerships that we're seeing. A really good example, if your destination needs any type of training, do train the trainer models. Keep that investment in your communities. And then the fourth ingredient, which I'll kind of just give a little shout out to any initiative and research organizations globally, including TAXO. Utilize our resources. We're here to help you, and they're free. There's the Blue Tourism Resource Portal, which we launched in September. This is full of case studies and white papers from all around the world. And my favorite emails are the ones that I receive from DMOs or just any organization that's like, I have this problem in my planning or policy process. Can you help me with an example? Or help me through what other examples around the world, what's worked, what hasn't worked. My door is always open, and if I don't have the answer, I will make sure in the TAXO network that I will get it for you. So.
Thank you so much for that, Stephanie. And that's it is a good reminder in terms of, using examples. I firmly believe that seeing is believing, and really understanding. And I think we need to capture that. And it doesn't take, it doesn't take a lot. I mean, there are tons of examples here that we see a whole cross range of countries. Things that, half of this may not resonate with you, but actually a good proportion does. And there's some great lessons to be learned from that, which I think is incredibly important. In terms of Stephanie, when you think about this, maybe can you just say just a word about collective action? Because this is very much around partnerships, right? And you started to allude to a little bit about saying, my door is always open, I'm happy to be part of this, we can connect to the organizations. But are we seeing more and more collective action?
Yes and no. To be honest, I think during COVID, one of the pieces that we got used to this Zoom and virtual world, and now we're getting these in-person meetings again, and they're reinvigorating us, and that gives me so much hope. I think that there is this piece, though, of trust and that pre-competitive action point. How can we get pre-competitive initiatives started within the private sector, and how can those public and private partnerships really be long-lasting investments? And I think that comes with time and trust, and time is just something that we don't have a lot of nowadays.
Yeah. So Ibu Nani, just reflecting on what Stephanie's just said there in terms of Indonesia, and is the government providing incentives for more public-private partnerships, with that you're embedding in with the communities? I mean, is that something that is really trying to move this agenda forward?
Yes, I think, yeah. So because I think the approach of the public-private partnership, now we see the some programs such, for instance, for the waste management. So we are going to replicate to make more facility with this PPP approach. So where the private come, but also can get also support or facility from the central governments, on also collaboration with the local governments. But they also, the local community are involved directly to that activity. This is one example. But I think we have some others example also where we actually working with this PPP approach.
Yeah. So I mean, thank you very much for that, Ibu Nani. And I think what you've seen, hopefully, is, and this is what I get really excited about, is just the multi-dimensions of this that brings in people, environment, the economy, and there's some win-wins that can be achieved through that. So, if nothing else, I mean, hopefully this is, taken away from this session, it really has been stimulating some thoughts, providing some new context and texture to some, firsthand experiences here, of someone who is, been all through his life and now is leading a country that is going to be leading the way in tourism going forward, different scales and different geographies, and then the role that the private sector can play in that. So I think very, 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 very exciting. Before I let us go and complete the session, I'm really delighted to welcome the Minister of International Development for Norway, Anne Beate Tvenerven, who can offer some words from Norway, and part of the panel, etc. So, Anne, if I can pass this to you.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you for allowing me a couple of minutes just to sum up the discussion. It's been really inspiring, and I think we all agree. We've passed the big, glossy speeches. We want some action. It's really nice to get the concrete examples on the table. We all enjoy that. Just a few overarching comments. First of all, I'd like to thank the Oceans Panel and the author of this report for a very good report, and I agree it's useful to have examples to touch upon. I think it's a good basis for inspiration. Second, we all know that the tourist sector is extremely diverse from country to country, but I still think there is a lot of potential for joint and coordinated efforts at a much larger scale than what we've seen up till now. And you put it so nicely. So I hope everyone that's listening will take you upon your word and send you an email. Because what we need to do is share lessons, but not only that, we need to scale initiatives. Thirdly, the need to acknowledge experiences that integrate local and indigenous communities as agents of change. And we need to not just talk about it, but actually do it. Many of you mentioned COVID, which was a real blow to the tourist industry in the whole world, but at least what we saw in my country, and I think that's the case in many countries, is that it was also the opportunity to reset the industry. Many destinations in my country had to think anew, but they also had access to a new group of tourists, a new domestic tourism, which gave the industry an opportunity to reset and think anew. So let's use this as an opportunity as well. In my own country, we're presenting a new action plan for tourism in a couple of months, 3 months or so, which will focus on sustainable development, on year-round jobs and destination development. We all know how essential this sector is for our economy, for my country, even more so for many other small countries. Done wrong, it can be a real mess and produce more ill than good. Done well, it can not only be a source of income, but also a source of, it can be an agent of change and a source of educating future generations if we do it right. To sum up, maybe the most important thing said in the panel was the president's words on how it all starts with putting a value on our heritage and on our biodiversity. If we are not able to value it ourselves, then we will not do it right. And one of the great examples in this report is exactly the example of Palau, the first country in the world to, it's all here on page, what is it, page 3 or something? The first country in the world to change its immigration law to ensure environmental protection, where upon entry visitors must sign a passport pledge that they will act culturally and environmentally responsible. So I'd like to sum up by reading this fantastic pledge. So this is what you have to sign when you enter Palau. Children of Palau, I take this pledge as your guest to preserve and protect your beautiful and unique island home. I vow to tread lightly, act kindly, and explore mindfully. I shall not take what is not given. I shall not harm what does not harm me. The only footprints I shall leave are those that will wash away. Thank you.
Wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful, Minister. And what a fantastic and inspirational way, to end it. I had some sum up notes, but I think it's important we just leave it there. So again, thank you so much, Minister, for those wonderful words. Great inspiration. I'd like to thank our panelists, President Whips, Ibonani, Stephanie. Thank you so much for spending time with us on this important issue. And I can tell you more to come with the panel on this issue. It's a priority, and we see this growing more importance and thinking of ways we can leverage the work of the panel to really take advantage of this moment to get the balance right with tourism and nature and the healthy ocean. So thank you all in the audience. Thank you online. Thank you, our panelists. Thank you again. Bye-bye.